Welcome to the Short Stacks, our shorter conversations with authors about their process and their books. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and our guest today is Robert Fieseler. Robert is the author of Tinderbox, which is one of our Stacks book club picks for the month of June. We'll talk to Robert today about the book and his process as a writer, but will not include any spoilers. Then you can turn in on June 5th for our full in-depth conversation about Tinderbox. If you want more of the Stacks, head over to patreon.com/thestacks to be part of our bookish community. Patreon allows listeners to help support the show while earning cool perks. One of my favorite perks is our virtual book club, where our Patreon community hops on a video call to discuss the past week's pick from the Stacks book club. It's always awesome and a great way to unpack the book. We have a bunch of other perks, so head over to patreon.com/thestacks to check them out. If you like what you hear, please take a moment to rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts, especially if you're listening through Apple Podcasts. Now it's time to meet Robert Fieseler. Robert is the author of Tinderbox, the untold story of the upstairs lounge fire and the rise of gay liberation. Fieseler has been the recipient of the Edgar Award and the Lambda Literary Award for Tinderbox, and it's easy to see why. We talked today with Robert about how this story came into his life and how it's been received in the world, plus a lot more. There are no spoilers today, so enjoy. All right, everybody, I am here today with Robert Fieseler. He is the author of Tinderbox, which is a book club pick for us, which you'll hear in June. So before we dive into the book club, I wanted you guys to meet Robert and get a little sense of his book. So Robert, thank you for being here.
Hey, happy to be here.
We're so excited. Okay, so we always start with this question. It's really easy. You should have it queued up because your book has been in the world for a while. In about 30 seconds or less, can you tell us a little bit about Tinderbox?
Yeah, Tinderbox is about a notoriously unsolved arson fire at a gay bar that took place in 1970s New Orleans and claimed 32 lives. It was the deadliest fire on record in New Orleans history, and yet it received just a few days of coverage in its day due to rampant anti-gay bigotry. And despite a bounty of evidence pointing towards the person who intentionally set blaze, a gentleman named Roger Dale Nunez, who is internally conflicted gay man, all that evidence was cast aside in its time period due to anti-gay political animus, and thus was this historic tragedy permitted to become what it is now, which is a historic mystery. It's an unsolved crime. So that's the book. It's about the upstairs lounge fire. It's called Tinderbox.
You're so good. Okay, so tell me this. This fire was not completely forgotten, but largely forgotten in the public. How did it come to you?
Sure. So I went to a journalism school in New York City, and the main professor there, or like the dean, was a guy named Nicholas Lemond, and he liked to tell these wizened stories about when he was getting his stripes as a reporter, and when he was a baby journalist, and he reported for an alt-weekly publication in the French Quarter of New Orleans called the Vieux Carré Courier, and he would talk about this newspaper with quite fondness. It sort of was a ultra-liberal publication in the 70s. It sort of modeled itself off of kind of what the Village Voice was in Greenwich Village. And his mentor was a then radical out gay man named Bill Rushton. So I was at one of these awkward wine and cheese things or whatever, and trying to make conversation with a professor like a students do is totally uncomfortable. And he dropped this. It was kind of like this bomb of information on me. We were talking about something. He's like, that reminds me of this fire that happened on the fringe of the French Quarter in 1973, killed 32 people. Nobody really spoke about it afterwards. And I was like, whoa, pump the brakes. It was that was my initiation to the event. I had so many questions based on what he just said. And he couldn't really answer them in a fascinating way. He was like, I don't know why, but my grasp of facts is failing me here. And generally that's not the case with this guy. This is a guy that remembers what he ate for dinner in 1984. So I became obsessed. I flew down to New Orleans. I was then living in Brooklyn and Williamsburg, like a cliche hipster. I flew from to Brooklyn and New Orleans, and I was staying with the only two people I knew in town in this on a day bed in a sunroom that would get really hot by 9 a.m. So I was out in town researching a lot. And I found some of the original articles that my professor from the journalism school, Nicholas Lemon, reported in 73 that summer. And it turns out he was in the summer in the quarter that time, and he was doing stories while the fire occurred. And some of his stories appeared side by side coverage of the upstairs lounge. And yet when I was asking him more questions about it, he kept telling me, I don't understand why I don't remember this. It's too hazy. I began to understand that something really traumatic happened in that city, that this was a kind of emergency event that sort of draped a veil of forgetfulness, and created a kind of forced amnesia in this city, which is otherwise a storytelling city. This is a city where, like, if you came when I first came, everyone wants to know where you're from. Everyone wants to hear your stories about where you've been. And yet in that, even in this culture, one story for years was off limits, the upstairs lounge story. So of course I was obsessed. It hit all of my buttons as a journalist, as a reporter, and as a gay person. And because I've always wanted to report a story about when homosexuality was a secret subculture. And beyond that, I'm obsessed with the notion of the unsayable in our society, and denial as a human phenomenon. And that this book and that subject deals with all of that material.
Wow.
So it was one of those things where I don't know, opportunity rings like definitively in your life, where you're just like, oh my gosh, like there was no choice not to write it as soon as I found out about it.
That's so awesome. It's like your calling or something. Do you feel like, so you've written this book, I'm obviously, if you haven't read the book yet, it won't be obvious to you, but it's obvious to me as someone who's read the book. You did a ton of research, amazing research. Like it just,
thank you.
One of the things that sticks out about the book is how well reported it is. Like I really felt like I trusted what you were saying, because I was like, this guy has done the work. You know, sometimes you read nonfiction and it's like, where did you get that from? Like, what?
Oh, I do know what you mean there.
Yeah. And for your book, I was like, this has to be a fact because this guy has given me so many facts leading up to this. Like, I'm with him. But that being said, what has your response to this book been in the greater, queer community, but also specifically in New Orleans?
Oh, New Orleans has embraced this book in a way I never expected. I thought because and I live here now. Like right. I moved down to New Orleans, which should be a signal about how welcome I was in town after the book came out. Yes. But so I didn't know New Orleans is an idiosyncratic culture. It's like a foreign country in U.S. soil. And I didn't know if, as an outsider, a person who did not grow up here, how the city would respond to me talking about an event that didn't really cast historic New Orleans in the best light. And it turns out the city has gone through this tremendous transformation in terms of its relation to its queer culture. I knew this a little bit, but I still couldn't sense about, well, then how is that going to affect? Because you can never guess how someone's going to respond to your book. But right. There is such a thirst for upstairs lounge history that my book was accepted with open arms. I have gone to and spoken at more packed events involving upstairs lounge history in New Orleans than any other city. I've sold more books for Tinderbox in New Orleans than any other and it's continuing now, where I consistently will meet people who were historical figures featured in my book, and you never know how a source is going to respond right. when you report them, who we end up hugging and gabbing like old girlfriends oftentimes. So I feel like the city has been the kindest, actually, of all places to the book, and I think most receptive. Because there's such a passion, I think, now to own any sort of event that occurred in this town, because the city has such a pride in a strange sort of way for all of its grit, and also for really the for its journey and for all the metamorphoses that the city has gone through, not just with Katrina, but with all sorts of things.
Right.
So yeah, New Orleans has been so generous. You asked about the queer community. And how they responded to it. It depends, the answer to that. So I've gotten most queer readers will respond very emotionally to the book. And I'll get either people will approach me at book events crying, and I'll have to we'll hug it out. It's an incredibly emotional thing to go through. Or I'll get really sweet emails where people want to tell me their stories about growing up in the closet, living double lives, et cetera, and how they were able to come to embrace their true selves. Always, I'm thinking you should publish this. Why are you just emailing me this story? It's incredible. There is a certain breed of, especially I've noticed, because you see certain types of people coming with certain types of reactions to the book. And I'll shoot straight with you about it. So like, there's a certain breed of queer studies scholar, that I think, wishes I had included more Foucault, like quoted more books like Epistemology of the Closet or things like that, or gotten really into, academic nitty-gritty, which I had in some portions of the larger manuscript, which was twice the size of the book I published. The original manuscript of Tinderbox, was like my husband called Gay War and Peace, or Gay Lord of the Rings. And I in that version, there were a lot of interludes, even more so. The genre spun so much more widely than it does in the book. And I actually think it spins kind of widely at some parts of the book right now as it was published. So, and you reach a point eventually where you recognize, it's not going to be all things for all people. And there are certain people who've spent their entire academic careers earning doctorates around, the evolution of the word gay. For example, or the notion of sexual difference now vis-a-vis fairy culture in the early 1900s, and that's not something that in a book about a disaster in 1973 New Orleans gay culture I'm going to be able to get to. Right. And so usually those are the sort of people who give it they won't pan it. Nobody pans it, but they'll give it like what will they say? Good job, like that kind of thing, but they won't be like, this was the best book I've ever read. Right. Because they have their own agenda and things that they're coming to the book with. Yeah, and I tread into their terrain a little bit. And there's a lot of when you're dealing with a topic as vitriolic as queer culture, and oppression in the past of queer culture, the two sides of the political coin will generally come at you with the most vitriol. So the radical religious right is not a huge fan of the book, specifically because of its portrayal of gay Christians and gay Christianity in the early 1970s, and that offends their religious sensibilities. And so I'll get people emailing me with Bible quotes and things like that. How nice. I know, but that's sort of like, they're reacting to you. Right. So in a sense, your book is something they were forced to respond to. Right. Which means a part of them might eventually, even though they won't admit to me, a part of this group might eventually find sympathy for individuals who died, queer individuals who died in these events like this. Right. And then, the other group is like the queer left, the radical left. Doesn't like that I talk about how in the likeliest case, the arsonist who set the upstairs lounge fire was an internally conflicted gay man, and how this was very likely gay on gay crime in a time where people were so isolated within personal and societal divisions of the closet that many queer folk couldn't relate to individuals even with whom they were physically intimate. They believed that theirs was an individual burden, that whole get off me queer thing after sex, that sort of deal, which is very violent. And so that gets a reaction too. But I'm grateful for all of them, because I'd rather have people reacting and talking about the upstairs lounge fire than not paying attention. Right. Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack
and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to traceythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. I have a question about how you got your sources, because you have so many people and a lot of them are firsthand, like folks who are at the lounge or on the street that night. And so I'm just curious kind of how you came into them.
Yeah. You mean like the first person interviews I did?
Yeah, the first person interviews, but then also if you wanted to talk just a little bit about the other kind of sources you used to round it out. The research was so good. I feel like you should like brag a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So when I first went to New Orleans, I became like a library mole man, not getting enough sun. And and New Orleans keeps so much information in a lot of different places that I just kind of started ferreting things out in archives. So you can go find the police report, for example, on the historic upstairs lounge fire and all of the coroner's forensic reports. You can also find all of the historic news articles in another location. You can find and I'm weird, so I'll find like the notes of the reporters who wrote the articles too. I wanted all that stuff. And you start to gather like this greedy leprechaun, this entire mound of information. And from there, I started feeling like I had the confidence to start seeking out people who were historic figures, talked about, written about in this paper trail, who I could now reach out to with a basis of information. And so then I started, I had a list of survivors of the fire. And that usually in the police report, it came with an address, and usually it's a birth date. And if you have a person's first and last name and a birth date,
you can find them.
Yeah, you can go. Everyone's locatable. I don't mean to freak you out. And so would begin oftentimes what could be like oftentimes a 2 to 3 year text and email relationship leading to an interview. In a lot of cases. In some other cases, it would be you would meet people like who were fixers inside New Orleans, who were either C- or D+ celebrities in the French Quarter or in certain neighborhoods. People who know everyone, like the people who know people. And I met a couple of different little guides and guardians who I would tell about the story, who would then bring out their iPhones and be like, I know that guy. I know that guy who survived the fire. Here's his number. And that happened a lot of different times, where it would be unexpected connections and just these random pieces of serendipity. And being open to that would lead to me meeting an upstairs lounge survivor or witness. In one case, it was my Uber driver back to the airport.
Wow.
Who talked about how he had been in the Marriott across the street. And that wouldn't have happened had I not been speaking to him about my book and things like that. I guess I was just a talkative person.
Yeah, just chatty.
I guess so. But eventually, I would start to compile the interviews. The interviews would generally be about 45 minutes in length with a survivor or witness. And then I would do probably about 10 to 15 of them. And then from there, I would you look for a Venn diagram of information. So you look where multiple people are talking about the same thing, and then a piece of primary source archival material matches with it, where you can start to reliably say, yeah, I think that these three things agree that this happened in this place. And so I could include that in a scene reconstruction. And that's what the kind of the narrative nonfiction storytelling I like. I like scene reconstructions where you feel like almost you're there in the place. So when you have that amount of material, those sort of overlaps begin to permit that, where you can take people almost cinematically through a progression of events.
The scene that I'm thinking of, obviously, I think it's probably, you got a lot of feedback on it, is the scene of the fire itself. And it's one of the most, I've never read anything like it, where I was it gave me all the feels. I can't even articulate it now months later, but it was really fantastic, that section. Like,
oh, wow. Thank you.
I mean, the whole book is great, but like that section sticks out to me as something unlike anything I've ever read. And I love a nonfiction true crime retelling, forgotten. Like your book is right in my personal wheelhouse.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so that was, I mean, really special that moment, those moments. It's like 30 pages maybe that are just like,
Yeah. It took me 3 months to write that part in the initial draft.
wow.
It was awful. I was
I'm
crying
sure.
a lot.
Well, I felt sick to my stomach reading it, so I have to imagine it had to have been really challenging on you if you're spending 3 months with it. You know, I spent maybe an hour.
I do talk about this because some authors will tell you, no, it was such an honor every moment of this, and it was an honor to tell a story. But forcing my brain back into that burning room with all the people dying was the most, heart-wrenching thing to do every day. And I threw up a couple times. It was really awful to do. I ended up writing in a library though, where I could bring my dog to work. So I'd be writing this awful thing. And then my dog would look up at me and wonder why, I'm so upset or I'm bawling my eyes out. And then we'd go for a walk. So I could have at least moments and breaks away from that. And then I'd made friends with a couple other upstairs lounge scholars who knew about what it was like writing that scene. A guy named Clayton Dellery, who wrote a great book on the upstairs lounge called Upstairs Lounge Arson. And I could call Clayton on my little walks with my dog through Boston Common. And I remember a couple of times just calling him and being like, it was so awful. It was awful what happened to these people. And I was debating about, is this sensationalistic to continually portray in the grit and to zoom in on what precisely was happening. And I decided it was necessary because for years and years, all the outside voices echoing around this scene had said, what happened to these people didn't matter.
Right.
And I thought that it mattered tremendously. And so I wanted readers to, in the first, half of the book, the fire scene happens halfway through the book just because of the way it's structured. People think that they're actually not that far through it. And I wanted readers to fall in love in certain ways with certain characters that they meet and wondering as the scene is building up in that sort of suspension of disbelief way, well, who's going to live and who isn't through what's about to happen. I wanted these deaths to feel consequential because they were, not just to the people who were immediately impacted, but these were men and 31 men and one woman whose lives had real meaning and who were quite special inside the culture that they lived and worked in. So I'm grateful to hear that you responded that way. If that scene didn't work, a book about a fire is not going to work. The fire scene has to be the most compelling piece of writing. It also has to be the most exact reconstruction of what happened. Yeah, and it has to. I wanted the reader to sort of have to take breaks almost because things are happening on a second by second basis that are irremediable, that can't be undone. And what was weird about writing that is it felt like I got to the fire scene and I didn't want to do it. I'd fallen in love with the characters, the historical figures so much that I wish I could have let them out of that room.
Right. I know. Reading it, I felt that way. I was like, maybe someone's going to open the door and they're going to be fine and the fire truck will be here. Like, you have that feeling of kind of like in Titanic where you're like, maybe if Rose would just move over, like everyone could live.
I thought about that and I'm like, that's a piece that would be where fiction starts. I see now why people fictionalize events because they're like, what if did it have to happen to him so much? And it felt like I was doing it to them because I kept making those choices. Obviously I wasn't, I didn't, but because I didn't, I'm just recollecting and rebuilding events as they did occur. But it's a terrible thing to be that sieve or to be that medium where you're involved in doing this. And it's not joyful. I don't know how it could be, but some aspects of writing there are some scenes that are beautiful to write. I hear in a writer's history. But this was my first book. And this scene itself was, something else. I had to go see a grief counselor afterwards.
Wow. That happens a lot in these, writing these kinds of books. Do you hear that? Or that's kind of a question and an answer.
Sometimes, yeah. I'm from a journalistic background though. So I would speak to muscled up war zone reporters, you could picture the kind of white bro I'm talking about that goes to Syria. And I would ask about, how you deal with that. And I would get these answers that were real tough guy stuff. So I didn't know for a little while until eventually that there's such a thing as ancillary trauma or secondhand trauma. You know, you have to take time to work through it or there's consequences.
Right. Yeah. That's really difficult stuff. I do kind of want to talk about you and the actual writing of the book. This is always some of my favorite questions. So you mentioned that you wrote some of the book in a library in Boston with your dog.
Yeah.
What was I know you went to journalism school. I know that you had careers before you wrote this book. You worked in advertising and that sort of stuff. So how do you work? Where do you work? Do you have to be in a quiet space? Do you have to be in your home, out of your home? Like, what's your writing setup?
Oh, you want to know like what my writing bugaboos are and what my ideal writing creative space
and if you
is?
eat any snacks or drink any beverages during that, I really like to talk about food and drinks if that's on your table, or if you like light a candle.
I'll tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you. Okay, so most people don't want to know about this, but so I'd wanted since I was 5 years old to write a book, and I was like, I had to wait till I was like 33 before like someone had this opportunity for me where I took a book to contract, and finally the world was like, okay, you can do it, and then I was like, shit, like I didn't know. I thought I thought at some point someone was going to turn to me and go, where are your parents? Go away, get out of here. You can't go. I'm going to go find a real writer to write this book. And then, it went to contract. And then finally it just dawned on me, I've got to write this thing that I told everyone I could do. So I was like, well, I'll write in the morning. Writers write in the morning. Some people write at the crack of dawn. I hated writing at the crack of dawn. I'm not a farmer. I didn't grow up in that environment. I can't do that. I'm not a morning person. And I was like, some writers write at night. They're like drinking their absinthe and they're like sipping it and they're like so romantic about it. I'm going to write late at night. And then that would blow everything out of the water for me. I could not write late at night. So I figured out like what my ideal creative space, my golden zone, I called it, was 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., pure creative writing, and I would write through lunch. I would have to figure out some way to just like throw calories in my mouth for a span of 5 minutes during a break or so. I figured out that I couldn't write in coffee shops because it's too loud. And the music is oftentimes too good. Like I'm a gay boy. I'll like almost want to dance to it. And then I would be writing stuff and I would be like, I'm writing up a sentence I wrote, like was almost a rhyme of a song that I just heard. I'm too influenced by that stuff. And I also realized I couldn't write in silence either. Like, cabin fever, I tried writing in my own apartment. Like cabin fever is real. If you're inside all day long, oh my God, it's not a good idea. It's almost like you're putting yourself in a prison cell. So I had to find out a space like that I could utilize as an office that would have just enough noise, but not too much noise, that I could work from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in, and I could work through lunch where I could probably also bring my dog and have coffee. It was very important. So I would have coffee or green tea. And then I would go in the middle of that at some point. I would take a 10-minute break and go for a walk in the afternoon to get an espresso shot with one of those. We're at a nice place that would also give you that what's called those glass Gibraltar cups that they would put the sparkling water in beside that. And I like that. So that would be like my little treat where I would amp up after like. So I would essentially what I would start. You can let me know when I'm too detailed, but I would start writing. All right. Usually the last section that I'd stopped writing at, where I do a little bit of editing, and then I start plowing forward into the writing. And I had a word count goal every day of 1,200 to 1,500 words. Okay. And if I hit 1,500 words, that's a couple pages, like 5 or 6 pages maybe. If I hit 1,500 words, I'd stop. At one point, I was having this amazing day where the clouds of my mind parted and I was like 3,000 words. And I was like, yeah, I was rocking it out, and I hit a wall, and then I couldn't write again for like at that level. I couldn't even get 200 words out like the next 3 days. It was so frustrating, even though I would go back and fight for it. So I realized that like you can steal the energy of the next day today if you don't allow yourself, to stop, to halt at a certain point and treat yourself like an animal that needs to be mended. And like also be kind to yourself. So I would try to hit 1,500 words a day each day. And it's like 3 days of that, then I have momentum. And then I can continue doing that for as long a span of time as I want. And I would take no days off. Taking a day off, like my husband so wanted me to take days off. And taking a day off, I would like screw up the momentum of it. I would lose track of what I was doing. and then I wouldn't be finishing chapters, and then take each chapter, and that creates like, a group of chapters as an act of the book. There's 3 acts in my book, and then you finish all 3 acts and you're done. You've written a book.
Yay!
But I think authors that discover ways to find their momentum finish books. And if you can't find momentum, I don't think you're going to finish a lot of, even authors that have completed other books but can't find momentum on the book they're working on.
I see.
Odds are won't be able to finish it.
Interesting. What sort of stuff were you personally, not necessarily related to the book, reading or listening to watching while you were writing the book? If it is related, that's fine too, but it doesn't have to be like research.
It's totally unrelated. So I'll tell you, I couldn't read any serious nonfiction because that all felt like part of my job.
Right.
So I was reading Ursula K. Le Guin passed away in the middle of, and what happens with me is I'll read the obituary of an author and I'll think, I need to read that person. That's how I'll discover authors. I'll read people that have been dead, or just died usually. So I read almost all of her entire collected works. So I read like Children of Earthsea. I read it's like the Hainish cycle. I've read A Left Hand of Darkness. The word for world is forest. The Dispossessed. She wrote a beautiful series of short stories about called the Orsinian Tales, which is about this made-up East Bloc communist nation and sort of the history. And they're these gorgeous, like, makes you weep love tales of people falling in love in a society that's like a prison. And it was lovely. So I would read that kind of stuff. And I would also read very serious, very nerdy, speculative fiction and science fiction. And that would be a good distraction for me, but also applicable oftentimes because great sci-fi authors and great speculative writers are great weavers of material.
Sure.
They're great world builders. And in my book, I felt like I was utilizing setting as character. I was almost New Orleans as maybe probably one of the biggest characters in the book.
Right.
And so I was learning from I felt like these authors who really knew how to create worlds and utilize setting well, how they did that. I think Ursula K. Le Guin probably does it better than anyone else, actually. So that's the kind of stuff I was digging into.
That's awesome. I love that. You're actually the second person who we've had on the Short Stacks who said Ursula K. Le Guin they were reading while they were writing their book. Did the book ever have any other titles?
It had a different subtitle. What was the book? And it had a different title when I pitched it. It wasn't good. What was it? I think I pitched it and it went to contract as like Brotherhood of Man or something like that, where I'm just like, man, I had a real tin ear.
Yeah. What is that?
It says nothing about the fire. And I think like the subtitle at one point was like the terrible tragedy that awakened a nation to queer something or something like that. And my editor was like, Bombay. He sounds like this when he talks. Bombay. Like it doesn't say anything about the upstairs lounge fire. And I was like, all right. And so I tooled with it for months until it didn't work. And eventually he wrote the subtitle. He did like a analysis too of all the other upstairs lounge works. And then he sort of dug through all the stuff that he felt that I found that was new. And he was like, we're going to really own this, Bobby. And I was like, oh my God, you're going to cause me so much trouble. My editor's name was Bob. I was like, you're going to cause me so much. But so he went with it. But so Tinderbox was my creation. And then the subtitle ended up being, I don't know if it was him and a team of people that sort of wrangled it away from me because I just couldn't get it right in their opinion.
Right.
But some of that is also being a first-time author, I'm told. But I ultimately like both. I think what we've come up with is fine. I wish it was maybe a shorter subtitle, but I've noticed nonfiction history books oftentimes the subtitle is so long. It's like a chapter in its own right.
Okay, I have just one more question for you, which is for people who liked your book, can you think of any books that you might recommend to them? Maybe not necessarily the same topic, but in the same vein, or you feel like your book maybe is in conversation with or something like that?
Yeah, certainly. There's a book called The Gay Revolution by Ms. Lillian, I believe it's Faderman is how you pronounce her last name. Okay. I highly recommend that book. There was an additional... So that's a good overview of the sort of rise of the queer movement politically and its successes, its unprecedented successes in the course of American history. I think that's a highly relevant book, and I think I recommend it. Actually, there's some books that I didn't enjoy reading, but I had to, like for background. This one I enjoyed.
Okay.
There is a book that came out called The Boys of Fairy Town, which is by a guy named Elledge, I believe. He got nominated for the Lambda Literary Award this year, and it's about queer fairy culture in early 1900, essentially 1900 Chicago. And I thought I think it's quite magnificent the way he reconstructs a lost society, and I love that. And then same thought. I don't know if you know about fairy culture at all and how it deals with it. It's a little bit different than our definitions of homosexual, heterosexual, etc. It's its own little kind of universe that people forget about. But George Chauncey wrote a great book called Gay New York, which again was really the first exploration of queer fairy culture, and it was in New York City. And his book reads like, oh my gosh, a cup of Earl Grey and some dark chocolates.
Earl Grey's my fave.
If you like queer history, and you like it written elegantly, oh my gosh, Mr. Chauncey, it's just going to be he takes the cake. Essentially.
Love that. I love that. That's so wonderful. Well, So we're going to be talking about your book on the show in a few weeks. But thank you so much for writing this book, and thank you for making time to talk with us.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert. And we will see you guys in the stacks. Thank you for listening to the Short Stacks, and thank you to our guest, Robert Fieseler. Get your copy of Tinderbox wherever you get your books, and remember to tune in to the Stacks Book Club conversation about Tinderbox on Wednesday, June 5th. For more from the Stacks, follow us on social media at the Stacks Pod on Instagram and at the Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And you can check out our website at thestackspodcast.com. To help support the Stacks and earn awesome perks, go to patreon.com/thestacks. Make sure you're subscribed to the Stacks wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate and review the show. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tegirigis. This episode of The Short Stacks was created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.